Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. We had some technical difficulties here, but welcome to the September 2025 edition of the Southeast Monthly Climate Webinar, where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. My name is Chris Fuhrmann. I'm the Deputy Director of the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I'll be giving a climate overview of the past month. Our other speakers today are Shelby Saxon from the Southeast River Forecast Center, who will provide a water resources update, Knox from the University of Georgia, who will provide an agricultural impacts update. And joining us today, we are pleased to have Dr. Andrew Joyner from the Tennessee Climate Office at East Tennessee State University, who will be giving us a look back at Hurricane Helene as we approach the one-year anniversary this week, with a focus on its impacts and how communities in Tennessee have been recovering from this devastating storm. Andrew will also give a special update on the worsening drought conditions across Western Tennessee. That'll be immediately following our regional climate overview. So again, thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder, type those questions and comments into the question box at any time, and they'll be answered at the end. Also, a recap email of this webinar will be sent out with a YouTube link to the recording in the next day or so. All right, so let's get started with an overview of the climate. A lot to cover today, so let's dive in. So over the past month, we've seen a continuation of mostly below average temperatures across the region. As we can see in the two figures here, the greatest and most widespread departures have been with minimum temperatures, and they've ranged from about 3 degrees to 6 degrees below average. In fact, numerous locations are on track to record one of their coldest average minimum temperatures for the month of September. Now, if we look at maximum temperatures there on the left, we see similar departures across much of the northern tier, while the western part of the region has generally been closer to average, with some areas even running slightly above. The same is true down in Florida, where both minimum and maximum temperatures have been running closer to average, and in some cases slightly above average over the past 30 days. And though not shown here, we also see similar conditions down in the Caribbean, where temperatures have been slightly above average across Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Indeed, if you've been tracking conditions down there in the Caribbean, you know this past summer has been somewhat of a welcome relief compared to what the region was experiencing back in 2024 and 2023, with far fewer days of extreme temperatures and humidity. In fact, the National Weather Service office in San Juan has only issued extreme heat warnings on 13 days this year. That's far fewer than the 51 days that we had with warnings back in 2024 and the 67 days with warnings back in 2023. Okay, next slide. So turning to precipitation, the story over the past month has been very similar to what it was last time, and that is contrast. We can see on the left that much of the region has been quite dry over the past 30 days, especially across the middle of the region, where some locations went a full 3 weeks without any measurable rainfall. And on top of that, numerous locations are on track to record one of their driest Septembers on record. And if we just look at the past couple of weeks there on the right, we see that the faucet has really been turned back, if not turned off, across a large portion of the region, with many locations recording less than 1/4 of an inch. And some places like Tallahassee, they're still waiting for their first drop of rain this month. Now, on the other hand, it's been quite wet down in parts of South Florida. As of yesterday morning, Miami had recorded 15.73 inches since the beginning of the month. That's the second highest September total through the first 21 days of the month, and a record going back to 1895. It's also been wet across eastern portions of Virginia as well. Down in the Caribbean, August ended with some beneficial rain across parts of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but since then, conditions have been trending a bit drier than normal, though that may change here in the short term, as we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, next slide. So how have these patterns played out in terms of the drought monitor? Well, it's probably no surprise that we've seen a broad expansion of abnormal dryness, with some areas of moderate drought expanding across western portions of Alabama and Virginia. We actually also see some small pockets of severe drought as well, and also along parts of the Gulf Coast. In fact, we may see some severe drought return to parts of North Florida sooner rather than later. The worst of the drought can be seen across western portions of Tennessee, where extreme drought returned just this past week, and Andrew's going to cover that in more detail here shortly. On the other hand, as you can imagine, the biggest improvements have been seen across parts of South Florida, where areas of severe and extreme drought have been holding on along the Gold Coast since early in the year, but now just a small strip of moderate drought remains right along the coast from Martin County down to Broward County. Okay, next slide. So it's been a while since we've looked at some drought monitor maps for the Caribbean, but as we mentioned last time, we saw some long drought-free streaks end back in August with abnormal dryness and even some moderate drought returning to parts of the islands. Hurricane Erin did lead to some improvements in the west, and recent showers across northern and eastern portions of Puerto Rico have led to continued improvements there. But unfortunately, much of the Virgin Islands have missed out on some of this rain. And so we've seen moderate drought return to St. Thomas and St. Croix for the first time in over a year. Now, conditions have actually improved a bit recently on St. Thomas, but we still see moderate drought continuing on St. Croix. Okay, next slide. All right, so beginning our outlooks here, looking at ENSO, conditions in the equatorial Pacific remain neutral, same as last month. And the odds of a shift towards La Niña later this fall continue to go up, now with a better than 70% chance of development through the end of the year. However, forecasters still expect it to be a short-lived and weak event with a better than a 60% chance that we'll actually return to ENSO neutral conditions by the middle of spring. Okay, next slide. So looking at the 3-month outlook from the CPC, we see above average temperatures across the region through the end of the year, with above average precipitation continuing across much of the Florida Peninsula, below average precipitation across western and interior portions of the region. Okay, next slide. And in the Caribbean, we see that the outlooks are continuing to advertise above average temperatures, but also now above average precipitation for the next few months. All right, next slide. Looking at the 3-month drought outlook, we see the drought is expected to persist with new development across much of Alabama, western portions of Georgia and Florida, and central portions of Tennessee. And it may be hard to see, but that small strip of drought across southeastern Florida is expected to go away, and no new development is expected over the coming months across the Caribbean. Okay, next slide. All right, so as we look to next week, temperatures are expected to be above average across the southeast and much of the country, while the interior of the region looks to remain dry, and the Atlantic coast is at least currently leaning a bit wetter than average. And if we go to the next slide, we see the tropics have become active recently, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So I wanted to bring your attention to just a few areas of interest that the National Hurricane Center is monitoring. The 7-day outlook shown here is actually the map from last night. So there have been a few updates this morning. The shaded areas shown here are zones of potential development later this week. So we'll need to keep our eyes on those here in the short term, especially the one shaded in orange there to the west, which could be an issue for us going into next week. In fact, heavy rain, we're already seeing this, I think, across parts of the Caribbean. Some heavy rain, gusty winds, and rough seas could be impacting parts of Puerto Rico later today and also tomorrow. That area there, which is now an invest, now has a 60% chance of development somewhere in that shaded zone within the next week, while the area to the east there, shaded in red, now has a 90% chance of development, but that one is not expected to directly threaten the United States, at least not currently. Hurricane Gabrielle, which is now a major hurricane, you also see on the map there, will continue to churn up waves and high surf along the east coast for the next few days as it starts its eastward track across the Atlantic. That said, the relative lack of tropical activity over the past month has certainly made headlines, especially given that this was during the climatological peak of the season, which according to the National Hurricane Center is September the 10th. Until this past Sunday, when Gabrielle became a hurricane, we had only had one major just one hurricane develop in the Atlantic basin this year. That was Erin, which is the furthest we've gone into the season with just one hurricane since 1994, over 30 years ago. In addition, we also saw a long stretch with no-name systems in the basin that also coincided with the climatological peak of the hurricane season. After Tropical Storm Ferdinand dissipated on August the 29th, we didn't see another named storm until Gabrielle formed back on the 16th, nearly 3 weeks later. And this actually ties the exact same period in 1992, the 19 days between back then Hurricane Andrew, which dissipated on August 29th, and Bonnie forming on September 16th. tied for the longest stretch with no active named storms in the basin during the peak of the hurricane season, and that's since the satellite era began in the 1970s. Okay, next slide. All right, looking ahead to late next week and next weekend, we see a continuation of above average temperatures across most of the region, with above average precipitation across much of the southern tier of the region and below average precipitation across the northern tier. Okay, next slide. And as we get into mid-October, we see above average temperatures and above average precipitation forecasted for much of the region, except across the interior, where we see equal chances for both temperature and precipitation. Okay, next slide. Okay, we've got our fall foliage maps here. I get in the interest of time, since we're running a bit behind this morning, I'm actually going to go ahead and skip these slides. We have our fall foliage maps up here. This is the forecast for the upcoming season. We usually cover this time of year. We have all our fall foliage links on our website, as well as a review of summer and our quarterly reports. So be sure to check those out on our website, sercc.com. And I'll go ahead and skip to the summary slide so we have enough time for our other speakers. It should be on the next slide there. Yep, there's the summary for you to look at after the webinar. Obviously, want to acknowledge our service climatologist, William Schmitz, helps out every month putting all this information together. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew, who's going to talk to us about the drought situation in Tennessee.
All right, thanks, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming in good on my end.
All right, great. Yes, so as you saw on the map that Chris shared of the region, West Tennessee especially is in a pretty rough shape. One of the few areas in D3 extreme drought. So there you go, you see that. West Tennessee and a little sliver there near Clarksville, and then down into southwest Kentucky and over into Missouri. So some pretty rough conditions there. If you can go to the next slide. Really love the SERCC Climate Perspectives tool. Looking at this one, this is the 2-month percentile rankings. So just the past 2 months, you're at the top or second ranking for Clarksville, Jackson, and Memphis areas for precipitation. So just a really, really dry 2-month period. You can go to the next one. You can see that the next one should show 3-month. There we go. So that's basically astronomical summer. So the driest summer period on record for 2 of these stations, second driest in Memphis. So just extremely dry, kind of in the western half of the state, increasingly dry as you move west. Next slide. So what do these rankings mean? So normally you're comparing these historically. So if you're below 2%, then you're usually in that D3, maybe even sometimes D4 area. So that's what those values can translate to with the drought monitor. Next slide. So looking at the past 7 days, we have finally gotten a little bit of precipitation, but as you can see, so the top is the precip, the bottom map shows how much we would expect over a 7-day period. So we're close to average in a number of areas on the northern half of the state. Down towards Chattanooga, not really much, if any, rainfall there over the past 7 days. So this may keep us from deteriorating more in northwest Tennessee. This week, we're going to update these maps later today and see where we are with the rainfall that happened over the past 24 hours. These maps were from yesterday. Next slide. So this is the standard precipitation index, or SPI. So this is showing how 30-day and 60-day periods align with historical values for precipitation, or what we would historically expect. And so you can really see the equivalent of moderate dryness, at least over the past 30 days, to even some areas of severe dryness. 60 days is really when you start to capture what's going on in West Tennessee and into Kentucky, with extreme, pretty broad levels of what would be the equivalent of extreme dryness or extreme drought. Next slide. Same kind of concept here with SPI. This is looking at 60-day, but this is looking at station level instead of interpolated data. And you can see really wild values out of Dyersburg and into Milan and towards Paris, and those areas definitely in the D3, maybe even really D4, get below negative 2.5. You can get into what could be considered D4 just based on that one metric. So there's a lot of metrics that we use for this, but just wanted to show you that at that station level, how dry it really is in West Tennessee. Next slide. 90-day, this really captures that full kind of summer, astronomical summer period, mid-June to mid-September, and you still see some of these D3 equivalent extreme dry areas in West Tennessee. Next slide. We don't often use this product, but it's mainly meant to look at potential for wildfire or brush fires. And so this is the Keach-Byram Drought Index. These are extremely high. Anything really over into the 600s and 700s is extremely dry. And you've got some of the highest values that you can get on the scale in West Tennessee. And we have had reports of small to medium brush fires. West Tennessee isn't as wooded and hilly and mountainous as East Tennessee, and so you don't have as big of a wildfire potential. If these numbers were like this in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, we'd be really concerned about wildfire, but definitely concerned about brush fire, and there's been a lot of reports of that over the past few weeks in West Tennessee. Next slide. Again, another tool that we like to use from the SERCC. This is looking at departures from normal with temperature. And so Chris alluded to this as well. This is just for the past week. You know, you've got areas, Clarksville 10, Jackson 11 degrees above normal for their max temperature. So that just adds to the drying and evapotranspiration and makes conditions even worse. Next slide. We every week check the Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or CMOR. For anyone on the call, you know, these are really critical for us to understand what the impacts are in our area. I believe Bree spoke about this last month, and so this is quite a there's quite a few pretty severe reports coming in from West Tennessee, and we check these out, we read them, and oftentimes there are pictures as well. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are some of the pictures that were submitted. The picture in the middle and to the right, those should be a lot of water in those pictures, and there isn't. And then how dry the soil is. A lot of farmers have either had severe crop yield losses or complete crop failures in West Tennessee. Pretty much no one out there is going to be getting another cutting of hay this fall as well. So there's going to be impacts to their livestock numbers. There's a number of farmers that have told me they've had to sell cattle, or they're feeding hay early that they normally save for the winter. So those are the things that we really are looking at right now for those impacts. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. We can get into our big picture view of the Southeast stream flows. And so over the last 28 days, if you look on the left side, we have our flows compared to historical. And we see that we have varying ranges from low to normal flows across the Southeast. In the panhandle of Florida and South Alabama, many of these rivers are in low flow conditions as of current. And so that also coincides with our 30-day rainfall being nearly 5 inches below normal in that area. In the coastal Carolinas, we also had some of our greatest rainfall deficits, and these reaches are now mostly below normal. So that deficit in rainfall is certainly starting to show up in our river systems. In South Florida, we actually saw positive rainfall anomalies, but there's still a mix of below normal and normal flows in that area, and even some above normal. So where there was rain, we're seeing some good range of flows, but where those positive anomalies, maybe not so much, we're seeing some below normal and normal. Moving to our full Southeast average runoff graphic on the right, we see much of the influence of September being so dry. And so in August, we were kind of on an increase. It was almost kind of like the rain turned on, but then in September, things turned back off. And so we were nearing that 76th percentile at the end of August, but we have now fallen into the 24th percentile as we are approaching the end of September. And so that would coincide with being in a normal and approach to above normal to now falling below normal across the Southeast. On the next slide, we'll take a quick look at the average stream flow in Tennessee. And this is just follow up on Andrew's discussion we just had. And so in May, there was a slightly negative trend that started there, but the runoff remained near the 95th percentile or much above normal until July. And the dry period has really continued since July there. And in August, runoff reached that below normal category. And so now we see the trend moving towards the lowest 10th percentile in Tennessee. And comparing this to last year, in September, it looks to be a month where the flows reach their lowest. And considering that tropical moisture led to some of that recovery in East Tennessee last year, it remains to be seen if there will be rain events that kind of assist these Tennessee rivers in continuing to fall, or if they will improve as we saw in the late season of last year. The following slide is the drought information statement that was released last week by the National Weather Service office in Memphis, Tennessee. So the geographic area that they are showing on this slide are the rivers of concern for the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Office. And so they border the Southeast River Forecast Center where I am from. And so these are a little bit outside of our range, but our neighboring office. And so being mindful that this statement was released last Thursday and didn't include any of the information for rainfall that Andrew just saw of the last 7 days. It's just discussing how the Tennessee River feeds into the Mississippi River and how those flows coincide together. And so last week, what they were seeing was on the Tennessee River. Some of those feeder channels were already experiencing normal to below normal flows. And so once we were looking at the Mississippi River side, that arrow, top most arrow is that northwest Tennessee area where the Mississippi and the Tennessee rivers meet. And at the time of this statement, they saw that the flows on the Mississippi were still around normal, but their extended forecasts were showing that these reaches would start to fall into the low water thresholds. And so if you're interested in more information on this drought statement or Lower Mississippi River forecast for the Tennessee area, the Weather Forecast Office in Memphis has a full drought information statement that they update weekly as long as there's moderate drought information posted on their webpage. And so we'll jump back over the Appalachians on the next slide. And so we're going to look at our state-based average stream flows. And generally in the Southeast, much like we saw in the full Southeast graphic, every state has been on a runoff decline in the last month. Being mindful that a lot of our moisture is typically from tropical events in September, we can sometimes see a decline before those events kick in, and even some sharp increases during September as we may have multiple tropical moisture events move through the area. Alabama as a whole is nearing the 5th percentile, which is where streams were in early September of last year. And so we're there now at the end of September. And so we're past that kind of climatological peak in flooding that we expect for the state there. In Georgia, flows have declined from above normal to normal percentiles, and that is kind of similar to what we saw last year in the movement from August into September. And we're actually a little above where we were last September in Georgia. In Florida, it continues to be the rainy season, and there have been some stalled frontal systems to move through that area. And so the state average runoff is normal, but it's less than where they were last year, as they'd already seen a few tropical systems to move over the state during the month of September. We'll go to the next slide where we have our more northern states. And so looking at South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, the recovery was consistent, or consistency in the flows that we saw in July and August have quickly transitioned from above normal or normal flows down to the 24th percentile, or what we call the below normal for these state average values. And so we can really see without having the influence of that tropical moisture across the southeast, it's led to stark declines in our average runoff in most states. The next slide will take a glimpse at our river conditions. And so we don't have generally any flooding occurring in the southeast. We do have one minor flood down on the St. Johns River, and this is actually a wind-driven flood. And so just having some of those low pressure systems pushing water up the St. Johns River system through Jacksonville is how this minor flood is occurring. And the next two slides might seem a little like what's happening right now. And so since we don't have any flooding occurring, these slides just highlight the importance of the tropical moisture in our overall climatology for the year. You can see that week 39 is typically a part of our tropical season peak in river flooding. And even in our South Florida groups, that's where you can truly see for the week of the year, about 70 of these minor and moderate floods are just from our South Florida groups. And so that lack of tropical events really showing a deficit in our overall flood climatology for the year. Moving to the next slide, we'll look at our flood outlook for October through December. And most of the Southeast has a normal risk for river flooding. The dominant meteorological features will shift during this period, and it's possible for some areas to see near normal rainfall. And so that's why we're just going with a normal risk for most of the area. In South Florida, where things have mostly held on to normal flows and there's been some rainfall, that is where we have the greatest chance for above normal river flooding risk. And so that is the area that we have highlighted in the yellow-orange color there. You can view my summary on the next slide at your pleasure, and I'll now hand it over to Pam Knox for our agricultural discussion.
All right, well, good morning, everybody, and we're going to go through this quickly because I want to make sure to give Andrew plenty of time to talk. Recent impacts, well, we've talked about how dry it's been. Those have certainly had impacts on a lot of the crops and pastures. So as was already mentioned, hay has been fed because there's no grass for the cattle to eat. Diseases are still affecting a lot of the crops this year, leading to reductions in yield. Also cosmetic quality, you can see the apple picture on the left-hand side there shows sooty blotch, which just means it's not a very sellable apple, even though inside it may taste perfectly fine. That's a loss of income to the farmers because they have to sell it at a lower price since they don't have this nice, perfect apple. One of the big things that's been in the news lately is the cotton jacid, or two-spotted cotton leafhopper, which has been affecting a lot of crops. It defoliates things like crazy. You can see on the bottom left there the okra patch, which is almost completely defoliated by this jacid. And so that's been a real issue this year. A lot of crops, corn is about half harvested, cotton and peanuts are just starting to be harvested. So the farmers are watching the tropics very carefully because, you know, we have to be careful about cotton being blown off the plants once they're defoliated, or peanuts sitting on the ground in the heavy rain that we might get from a tropical storm. Peanut growing areas are having a hard time because it's been so dry that the ground is crusty and they have trouble getting those peanuts up out of the ground. It's usually a two-step process. They take the peanuts and they invert the peanut plant so the peanuts can dry out before they complete the harvest. So timing with rain from tropical systems is really important because you don't really want the peanuts sitting exposed on the ground during that happens. If you just look at the National Ag Statistics Service, I would say overall the conditions for crops are worse in Tennessee, Florida, and Georgia than in the other states, just by the number of fair versus good and excellent condition reports that they have. And right now, of course, fall planting of vegetables and strawberries is underway in many parts of the region. We go on. The soil temperatures have been a little lower than normal because of that cooler temperature that Chris mentioned. And you can see the 1 meter soil moisture on the right-hand side there is really low, especially in parts of eastern North Carolina, central South Carolina, and then on into southwest Georgia and the panhandle of Florida. So that's pretty deep moisture. That's something that's not going to be alleviated by just one rain system. So we'll get some rain the next couple days. Probably not going to be nearly enough to break the drought. If we go on. Growing degree days, this map shows that even though it's been cooler temperatures, the average number of growing degree days is above normal. It makes me a little suspect, so I'm going to look into that more. So let's just go on. And a reminder that we are now approaching the first fall frost maps. The ones that are most likely to occur early in October are up in the high elevations of the Appalachians. The rest of us probably have about a month or so yet, but there's a 1 in 10 chance that northern Alabama and Georgia and western North Carolina could see frost, although I don't see anything in the long-range forecast at the moment. And if we go on, just one other item, and that is there's a new publication on the impacts of Helene on Georgia farmers that I think is really interesting. The Georgia Foundation for Agriculture surveyed 147 Georgia farmers right after Helene to find out what the impacts, especially in the first 72 hours, which is before most aid ever gets in, to find out what they especially had problems with. So if you have any work with extension agents or emergency managers and you're interested in that, I encourage you to go and find it. The link for that report was really long, so you can get more information at my blog post there. And I think that's the last slide I've got, except for my summary slide. And so now it's my pleasure to reintroduce Andrew Joyner, who talked to us earlier about the drought in Tennessee. And he's going to talk about the impacts of Helene on Tennessee as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. And thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Pam. Yeah, I'm really interested in that Georgia report too. I'm going to have to check that out.
Hey, Andrew, I'm going to jump in real quick while you get set up. I did make you a presenter. For those that are online, I know that this is probably going to go over the top of the hour. This is being recorded as always. So if you have to jump off, know that anything that you miss will be in the recording. But also too, if you have any questions that you can't ask because you got to jump off, feel free to email me. And we look forward to those questions. But Andrew, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
I can see it in yeah, perfect. There we go.
Got it. All right, good. No more technical issues for me, hopefully. Okay, well, thank you all for having me on to talk about this. It's we're right at the 1-year anniversary later this week of Hurricane Helene. Certainly devastating impacts across a large part of the Southeast. And I'm going to talk about kind of the big picture climatology, and then I'm going to get into some of the impacts in Northeast Tennessee. Certainly a lot of the impacts were in Western North Carolina, but we've had some impacts in Tennessee as well. So big picture, just about a week or so ago, NOAA released their story map, which is excellent. I don't know if there's a chat that maybe Elliot can throw this link into it if he wants to, but this is kind of the short link for the story map. I pulled a few things from it just to kind of walk through what happened, but it's a fantastic story map and summary of the event and kind of the big picture. So really it wasn't just Hurricane Helene. It was this low pressure system that started a few days prior, call it a or predecessor rain event that came through and really kind of stalled out and then created this funnel for moisture to come up with Helene towards through Georgia, through Florida, through Georgia, through South Carolina, North Carolina, into Tennessee and Kentucky. And so they kind of combined into this massive system. And this isn't, this is a little more technical imagery here showing how that kind of occurred. You have these two systems, upper level trough, then the cutoff cyclone, and then Helene kind of wrapping into it, which really was a big part as well with the direction of Helene and the direction of that moisture, pretty much perpendicular to our mountain range, the Blue Ridge mountain range. That's really our highest elevations, and that orographic lift added quite a bit to the amount of moisture and rainfall that we saw. So here's the path of Hurricane Helene. Made landfall as a major hurricane, Category 4 in Florida. You know, on one side, this is a low population part of Florida. I went to the University of Florida for my master's, went over to Cedar Key a good bit. It's a beautiful area. There's not a large population there, but pretty large fishing industry and oyster industry, and certainly there were some big impacts there with storm surge in that area. Then we look at wind and gust observations, and what you'll start to notice, and many in the climate and weather community already know this, but you know, the right side of the storm is the most damaging. That's where a lot of the impacts are, and you can see that here with most of these wind gust observations are to the right of the storm. Certainly Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, where we see a lot of the strongest winds for this. Similar with tornadoes, a lot of these come from the outer bands, and so you see these further away from the central track of the hurricane, and so you saw some pretty intense tornadoes, even one EF3 in North Carolina, but these were part of those outer bands of Helene. Then we get into fatalities, again, mostly on the right side of the track, and you see the huge numbers there in western North Carolina, really devastating, and we had a number of fatalities in Tennessee as well. These are fatalities by hazard, and so you can see how that varies depending on where you are in that track. A few storm surge related ones in Florida, and then we get really into mostly wind, and then western North Carolina, pretty almost exclusively flooding related fatalities. Looking at other impacts, power outages, you know, I'm in Washington County, which you can kind of see right here, and I was without power for several days, but that kind of pales in comparison to those that were without power for some almost 2 months, month and a half, 2 months without power, without water. I think Asheville was 51 or 52 days without water. Greene County in Tennessee, which is just to the west of Washington County, was also without water for several weeks as their wastewater treatment facility was inundated along the Nolichucky River. And you can also see the rainfall amounts, pretty large areas, over 10 inches of rain. And then you've got a couple of these areas that are really at your highest elevations where pretty widespread, over 20 inches of rain. And that rain has to go somewhere. And so a lot of it funneled down towards from North Carolina into Tennessee. I really thought this graphic was very interesting. Busick in North Carolina is where the highest amount of rainfall occurred, over 30 inches, over 31 inches over this several day period. And this breaks down kind of some of the hourly rates that we saw during the low pressure event with the predecessor event. And then you dip a little bit, and then you get the added moisture of Helene. And at Mount Mitchell State Park, the peaks for the predecessor event and for Helene were almost the same for the hourly rate. And so you can really see how that rainfall accumulated between those two events and combined to make this a really generational event that no one alive had really seen something like this. Doesn't mean it hadn't happened before. July 1916 is the most comparable event where we had two hurricanes back to back within about 7 days of each other. This was only about within 3 days. And so it was more rainfall and a higher intensity of rainfall than that event. The U.S. Army Corps Nashville District spent quite a bit of time doing the high water marks along a lot of the main rivers and tributaries, so you can see where those are at here. And you can explore this again more in the NOAA story map. And then you can see where the record flood points are, and then the points in red are locations where they have a long period of record. POR is period of record, and so when those are record events, then they mean even more because you know that they have been there for a long time and they've a lot of events have occurred there, and for this to be a record event is pretty indicative of how extreme this event was. I pulled a few of these, specifically French Broad here in Asheville. We know that this was somewhat comparable to 1916, but even compared to 1916, it was higher river stage there on the French Broad. Devastating impacts there in downtown Asheville and other areas around Asheville with flooding. And then the Nolichucky River, and this is closer to our area. This is about 7 miles south of where I am right now. This was by far the biggest event recorded on that river. The previous record was 24 feet, and the estimate is 33 feet. The gauge was actually destroyed, and so this is an estimate based on high water marks in that area. It stopped recording once it reached, I think, about 20 feet maybe. It was taken out by debris and flow. So let's get a little more specific into our geography. So these are 4 of the main watersheds that impacted us in Tennessee. So we have the Doe and Watauga watershed from north to south, Doe, Watauga, Nolichucky, French Broad, and then Pigeon. And so all of these watersheds you can see to the kind of eastern and southeastern parts of the watersheds. That's the higher elevation area. That's where really extreme rainfall occurred. You'll notice this is interpolated, so it's you get more accurate information with station data for extreme events. And so we had some stations, over 30 inches. When you interpolate that out, you don't have quite of extreme values. And so the values are even higher than what's shown here. And a lot of that rainfall was happening at the top of these watersheds just within a few day period, and then funneling down in a torrent of flow and debris coming down through North Carolina and into Tennessee. And so it had devastating impacts. This is the Pigeon River. This is probably one of the biggest impacts as far as transportation goes. This is I-40 near the North Carolina-Tennessee line, really unusable for quite some time. And this is not the first time that I-40 has been closed for landslides or other issues, but this was definitely one of the more devastating impacts to I-40 through that area. This is Newport, Tennessee, in Cocke County. They have been flooded before, but this was one of their most extreme flooding events, and so their whole downtown was underwater. And you can see the massive amount of flow going through the river there as well. This is the Nolichucky Dam to the north of Newport, and the flow rate over this dam was twice that of Niagara Falls. And so this was one of 2 dams that the TVA indicated was close to imminent failure. Luckily did not fail, but it's over 100-year-old dam, and there's definitely some research being done on these flow rates and how to make sure that we don't have dam failures. Luckily this one didn't fail. It would have been a much greater impact south of here, all the way towards Knoxville. We could have seen pretty big impacts from this type of dam failure. So getting into more northern parts of Tennessee, northeast Tennessee, many of you may have seen this image before. This is I-26 going through Erwin, Tennessee. So the Nolichucky Gorge comes out of North Carolina and into Tennessee, basically beyond that mountain range in the background. It's a very narrow gorge, not too different from the Pigeon River Gorge. And so you just had basically a giant spigot of water just funneling out of this gorge into this very small valley around Erwin, Tennessee. Huge amount of debris, huge amount of water coming through here. You can see both spans of I-26 were completely taken out, and both spans just fully reopened a few weeks ago. And so this has now been repaired, but the devastation is still really visible in all of these areas. The industrial park to the west is where, or to the left of the picture, is where there were probably the most fatalities in our area, with those that couldn't get out of where they were working. And then in the background, there's also the hospital, and I have a picture of that here in a second. Hampton High School, this is along the Doe River, so this is further north into Carter County. Their high school was flooded. They're rebuilding it now. Certainly when you lose a high school, especially a rural high school, that's where all of your community events are. That's where everything happens. Really devastating for that community, for the students especially, who had their year disrupted only a few years after COVID. And so really disruptive event for this area. This is the hospital that made national news in Irwin that was completely flooded. And then as they tried to rescue people, all of their critical equipment, their ambulances, their fire trucks, all lost during that rescue as they became quickly overwhelmed. Everyone was able to get to the roof. There were 54 rescues with helicopters. Swiftwater rescues couldn't occur because of the flow rate and the debris. Pretty much a miracle that they all were able to get out of that hospital. This is the type of damage we saw further downstream on the Nolichucky. This is one of several bridges that were just completely taken out on the Nolichucky by the flow and the debris. Looking a little more at the rainfall data, you can see again the same watersheds I showed earlier, and with the amount of rainfall we saw at the tops of the watersheds coming down through here. I really like this map on the right. This shows how rare of an event this was in each location. So if you see the darker the blues, these are 1 in 1,000 chance or 1,000 year plus events. And some of the statistics indicate in some locations it was up to a 2,000 year event. And that's a pretty widespread area to see that amount of rainfall, even up into Southwest Virginia and Southern West Virginia, which are often kind of overlooked with this event. Huge impacts there, Marion, Damascus, very, very big impacts in Southwest Virginia and long recovery process there as well. I don't know if this will play, but we'll see. Drone technology has advanced so much in the past decade, and we're fortunate in the Department of Geosciences to have a lot of drone technology that we've built up over the last several years. We even teach a drone class every fall, and so it's something that the community can come and take that class. We've had lots of like non-traditional students take that class, but it's been really beneficial for us to have those resources and to make them available to the Washington County Emergency Management Agency. Drones, I mean, you can get in the sky so quickly, get a ton of data, tons of imagery. I think we took probably well over 1,000 pictures of various bridges and communities, especially in the Bumpus Cove, Little Germany, that area of the Nolichucky, to really, and by the end of the day, we had assessed, processed those imagery, and we had new imagery of what that looked like. And then we could compare to really high resolution imagery that the state of Tennessee flew last year that really, hasn't been much construction or change since then. And we could do in GIS or geographic information systems, bring that in, use a swipe tool, use change detection analysis, all very quickly to provide, I would say, usable information to the Washington County Emergency Management Agency, the mayor's office, and anyone else, TEMA, anyone else who needs that information. There's so many kind of technological advances over the past 5 to 10 years that have made collecting data like that easier, safer too. You don't have to go into the major damage area. You can be at a distance, and so our drone operators can be safe, but really collect instant damage assessment imagery. We've got high water marks, we can see the debris lines, and so of course the water came up very quickly and went back down very quickly. And so if you don't collect that data, you're going to lose that information on what the flood extent was. And so long term, we'll be able to use that information to inform flood models to say, okay, let's run a 1,000 year event through some kind of flood model, usually the Army Corps flood model or a FEMA flood model. And where does that go? Does that match this event? Who's really at risk for this type of event? And I think that's something that's surprising too, is a lot of these communities were so far away from what they thought was floodable, and now they know that's possible. And so we need to go back in the coming months and years and really assess our community's vulnerability and identify more vulnerable populations than we thought, and then disadvantaged communities too, and under-resourced communities. And so that imagery, it has instant usefulness, but it has long-term usefulness too. I mean, these are perishable data sets, basically. If you don't collect it, it's going to be gone pretty quickly. And so we're going to be using those data for a very long time. So that's kind of an overview of some of the things that we did with our drone technology to try to fill in the gaps in our area for mapping the infrastructure damage. We also have been doing some flood modeling. This was actually a student project that was completed before Helene, and we were able to check that model when we were doing search and rescue and see that the damage or the extent of flooding was beyond what we had modeled for a 500-year event. We checked that while we were doing search and rescue on the first day after the flooding on that Saturday. We had a thermal drone that we put in the air, worked with our county emergency managers, TEMA, and Department of Environment Conservation as well on that while we did search and rescue. And then we moved into the infrastructure mapping. A lot of that infrastructure mapping was done with our LiDAR drone. We've got the swipe kind of maps that you saw in the video that were produced there as well. These are the 8 bridges that we flew. 5 of these bridges were completely destroyed. 2 were severely damaged and not passable, and 1 had a little bit of issues with the abutments, but other than that was okay. And so this is the Taylor Bridge. This is a major highway, Highway 81, going through Washington and into Unicoi County. Destroyed bridge here, and then further down the road, very similar issues to what we saw on I-40, where it just took out the entire road infrastructure next to the river. More bridges here. I won't go into detail. This one is really devastating. This is the Bumpus Cove area, what it looked like before the flooding, and then what it looked like after. And so this one's really hard for me to look at. I mean, these people lost not only their homes, but the ability to build back. That the land's not even there where their home used to be. Some homes completely gone, some shifted down the street. Really devastating to look at. So there is some ongoing research that we're moving towards. We have a geomorphologist here that's really studying the changes in morphology. Like I said, it's a geologic event, so changed river. Also tons of data being collected beyond our drones, lots of LiDAR data being collected so we can do some very high resolution before and after analysis to see where those changes are. And then landslides and debris flows were huge, especially in North Carolina, but even into Tennessee. And on the Tennessee side, this is another map that you can get to within the NOAA story map, but it's a USGS map of the landslide observations. You can see there's not as many on the Tennessee side, and there weren't as many on the Tennessee side, but there are more than are mapped. And so one of the things we're going to be doing in the next year is trying to create a better post-Hurricane Helene landslide inventory and really evaluating rainfall and maybe even flow data, especially for those that landslides that occurred along the river. Some of the other things that we've been doing in our area, we hosted a regional resilience roundtable this past May in Johnson City. Went really well, really tried to get information and data into people's hands. We did a pretty interesting exercise where we had these posters printed with flood zones in them for each county, each of the 6 major counties that were impacted in Tennessee. And these are the questions we asked. This was a risk perceptions exercise. So, which hazards do you think pose the most risk? Where have you seen these types of hazards? And then looking to the near future, 5 to 10 years, what do you think might be changing? A lot of people identified wildfire as a potential future risk because of all the debris that's been kind of added to the environment. Something that came out of that was this do-it-yourself risk assessment tool. So we've got thousands of these flyers now that we created with resources for people to basically see where do the data come from? Where can I have access to data to maybe think about my risk in my community, and how do I go through that process? What kind of questions should I ask? So if anybody on this call is in the area or within driving distance, we will be in downtown Irwin tonight from 5:30 to 6:30 at a resources event, handing these flyers out and talking to people about the event and how they can use data to kind of prepare for future events. We also have an art gallery in Johnson City focused on kind of artists that have created different products and displays related to the event. And this Friday, I'll be part of a panel discussion there where people can do a Q&A and ask different questions and walk around the gallery. It's a great space. It's actually a space where our climate office will be moving to in a few months. So we're really excited about that space. The other big project that came out of this, we had been working on this for years, trying to push the state to build a mesonet, which North Carolina already has their EcoNet, and other states have a mesonet. And so we were finally able to get funding through the state to do this. And so hopefully we'll be working with the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency on building this out starting sometime next year. We already have kind of an idea for areas that would be suitable for these. This will give us a lot more data. We'll have a station in every county, so 95 stations, reporting every 5 minutes, and we'll be able to better understand intense rainfall events and tie that into an advanced flood warning system. There are some projects that were just handed off to us last week from the FEMA Interagency Group The first two, forest culling and stream bank erosion, we'll be using our drones to look at monthly monitoring for these projects. And then Main Streets project is really looking at new flood models for historic main streets and what infrastructure might be at risk for future flooding. And then a Parks and Trails project that really focuses on cultural impacts and rebuilding in some of our state and county parks. Lots of other ongoing collaborations as well. So the recovery will be long, but there's a lot of community involvement and a lot of headway that's already been made. So I think that's it, and hopefully I'm not too far over.
No, thank you so much, Andrew, for that presentation. Wonderful information. We're only a little bit over, so we overcame quite a time deficit with the technology issue. Excuse me, with the technology issues. So, thank you everyone for joining the presentation. I would love for anyone to put their comments in the chats. Again, I really appreciate all the speakers today for their great information in their presentations. And we'll just monitor the chat here and see if anyone has time for questions. I'll also just throw out there too, we've been talking behind the scenes as a presenter group, just the interesting change in conditions for Tennessee, in the sense that a year ago we were dealing with record flooding, and I know it's not the same part in Tennessee, but here we are 12 months later, and the other side of Tennessee is now an extreme drought situation. So we're really dealing in with kind of this back and forth between extremes. Here in Tennessee is the example, but if anyone remembers how last year went between wet and dry, we're really dealing with this hydrologic whiplash in our region. Let's see. All right. We got one question. Can the presentations be shared? I will look into that and see what information maybe some of our presenters are interested in. If you want to send me a direct email, if you're interested in the presentations, that way I have your email, and then we can get in touch about what information we can get you. We'll look into that. Thank you for that. Andrew, this is a question for you. How are you maintaining momentum as the camera, lights, media, action, political aim, or how are you handling the momentum with this as there's questions about the need for this information?
I mean, it's one part of that. It's been really overwhelming. I have to keep track every year for my annual assessment report of everything I do, and so looking over the past 12 months, I've done over, I think, 65 interviews with local, regional, statewide, national news. There should be a story coming out with CBS maybe later this week that was filmed last month, and ETSU is also doing a follow-up video to the one I showed in the presentation today that should come out later this week. And so that's been overwhelming and a huge amount of time. As far as momentum goes, I think there are a lot of projects. I kind of mentioned, I flew through that towards the end, but there's a lot of projects, some of the FEMA interagency projects, they do have a little bit of funding associated with them that should be starting in a few weeks. So we're excited about that, getting some of our undergraduate and graduate students involved. And then I also have the drone class, the UAV class that I teach every fall. So we're teaching that this fall, and we're hoping to incorporate some of that stream bank erosion and forest culling into the class. And that helps maintain momentum too, because then you're getting students interested. They're asking questions. They may come up with research projects. There may be thesis projects out of that. There's definitely going to be some thesis projects out of the landslide work. There's a lot to be done there. So momentum is there for that. And then there are other larger projects that I didn't get into. as much. Well, there is the Mesonet project, of course. That will be a long-term project that we're really excited about and kind of working through the contract process now. But then beyond that, there's also some other projects that we hope will improve the county level mitigation planning process as we work with the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency on that, on kind of a data portal, but also kind of providing more information for counties to improve their mitigation plans so that they don't have some of these blind spots that they did with these types of extreme events. We also have some other projects that we might be working with East Tennessee Foundation and the Appalachian Resource Commission on that gear more towards community resilience workshops, or at least identifying opportunities to provide these resources, maybe at long-term recovery group meetings or existing kind of meetings. And then we plan on doing that resilience roundtable again this next spring. And we work with the American Institute for Architects on that. So there's a lot of collaboration, which also helps us maintain momentum. So it's a good question. It can be exhausting. It's been exhausting, but I think that there's a lot of hopefully good things that can come out of this that will help us be better prepared for an event like this in the future, and maybe reduce future loss of life and impacts on property.
Thanks, Andrew. And I got one more for you, and then we'll call it for the morning. And I think it's a good question, but you may have maybe outside your wheelhouse with it being, flood mitigation and planning component. But after this event, has there been a change in, or like has the rebuilding kind of changed its focus in terms of like, has it been more managed retreat, or has it been more build back where it was, but with, mitigation measures in place?
I mean, it's definitely a mixture, with personal property. It's not like everyone owns 100 acres and they can move up the hill, And so there are areas where people are building back in locations that we know are vulnerable. And, I don't know a good solution to that. But there's also the recognition of, this type of event can happen, of course, with time. Unfortunately, people will eventually kind of forget the extent, but hopefully with the data we're collecting, it will be harder to forget what happened. And so there's kind of a combination. There are some areas, like I showed that image of land that was completely lost. No one's rebuilding back in that specific location, but up the road just a little bit where there was flooding, they are rebuilding back. In that area. In some locations, they're elevating a few feet, which can help with events that maybe aren't as severe as this, that may be more likely because of the erosion and some of the changes in the channel morphology or channelization or channel changes in the rivers. So we're going to have to see how that plays out, but there's kind of a combination of both.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the great presentations today, the questions. Stay tuned as we get more information about what our next webinar is. That'll come out soon. And thank you again to everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.